That's where you have the biggest advantage. You start way ahead. If you wait until I think next month I want to sell my practice because I'm tired of X, Y, and Z, you're not going to get the biggest bang for your buck. So I started 2 years before and started putting systems in my practice, which I already had a lot of systems, but I started cutting out certain costs. I started outsourcing certain things to realize that, hey, I wanted to get the highest EBITDA possible and putting certain things in practice that made me look like a very, very attractive practice.
Kick it. Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Amit Gaglani, a PT who opened his practice in 2004, built multiple locations, and eventually sold it to a private equity firm. Paul and Amit talk through key tips on preparing to sell your clinic, creating an exit strategy, understanding the microeconomics of your market, crafting the perfect buyer avatar, and the importance of marketing yourself to buyers. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
If we jumped in a time machine, a hypothetical time machine today, we're recording this in mid-2024. Let's say we went back to the Amit of 2004, 20 years ago. Would you say that you were building to sell from the beginning?
No. The honest truth was I was building to create, the honest truth is I was building because I just wanted to treat my way and I wanted to live a lifestyle. If I were to really analyze, I was probably building a lifestyle practice, meaning that I wanted to make enough money to live the lifestyle that I wanted to.
And this is interesting to me because people don't realize that, it's like there's this sort of, you watch enough Shark Tank and you just sort of imagine that entrepreneurship is the path to freedom, when in fact, most business owners, not just in PT, but in my experience, most business owners have really just made themselves into a job that they can't get out of.
And I talk about it actually all the time. Like, are you a true business or are you like a mom and pop that is meant that way? So basically the difference is between a lifestyle business and an actual true business. So I'll talk about that. And I think most people get into it because they want to live a certain lifestyle. And then I guess what clicked for me at a certain point is, not only do I want a certain lifestyle, but I also want freedom and financial freedom. I want time freedom and financial freedom. So unless I treat it like a true business, then I'll never get out of the ups and downs of being inside the practice and working in the practice all the time.
So now that we've said that, like I've followed your stuff online for a while and I'm familiar, I think, with, what your background is. But for people that don't know you, can you give me like the 5-minute version of your background, starting the practice, growing it, selling it? Give me the story.
Yeah, sure. In 2004, I opened up my own practice because I got an OCS, which for, I'm sure your listeners all know what an OCS is. It just means I'm board certified in orthopedics. So I loved everything orthopedics. I loved treating orthopedic patients, sports medicine patients. I just loved it. So my whole mindset was like, I'm building a business to, treat patients. Let me do it the best way I can. Then once I got into a business, I was like, I would go out to market myself, right? I'd go out. So when I go market myself, I couldn't be busy because I was out marketing myself. Then I would get busy because I get all these new patients, but then I couldn't market myself. So literally think about a roller coaster going up and down, up and down. I'd have peaks and valleys constantly. So I realized, wait, there's got to be a better method, right? So then I started asking my friends who are in private practice, what do you do? And they're giving me their opinions. And then I realized to myself, wait a second, I went to school to be a specialist in this stuff. I got educated in all this stuff and I'm asking other people what they did. And that's their opinion. It doesn't mean it's like objective information. It's just, subjective information. So I really just realized, they don't know. Let me go get educated to become a CEO and to own a business. Let me become a business owner and to get educated as a business owner. So I went and found a company that trains people to become CEOs of like healthcare companies. And it wasn't an MBA. Most people are like, oh, so you got an MBA. So MBA is theoretical knowledge, right? That you have to take and you have to apply into your practice. This was practical knowledge. You learn certain things, you apply it into your practice over a 12-week period of time. You go back, you get more educated, you put it back in. So over the course of 5 years, I figured out, okay, these are the steps that I need to do to take my company to bring it to a certain level that I want so I can have the business that I want. Not the practice that I want, but the business that I want. So I went to work doing that. And then after a certain amount of years, after we added on multiple offices, I had about 12 physical therapists. Something started changing in the healthcare arena where ACOs, accountable healthcare organizations, hospital structures started buying over not PT practices, primary care practices. And I just noticed that the aspect of business in my area was getting harder. So either I could fight the fight and then wouldn't able to negotiate rates, or I can sit there and either partner with a strategic, which is a larger physical therapy company, or partner with a private equity company. I chose a private equity company that didn't already have a healthcare vertical. So private equity companies have all different investments. When they don't have an investment and they want to get into the investment, you're more needed, right? If you're partnering with a strategic, you're just a cog in their whole machine, right? I wanted to be a big fish in a small pond. So I chose that private equity company. And then we went to work, and I was one of the founding people that came in. And then a couple years later, as building it, buying other practices, we had about 100 offices. And that was about in 2017. And then the dynamics changed completely when you have that many offices, that many states and things like that. And I took a role as national director of payer relations, and I used to negotiate insurance contracts with insurance companies. Some of my PT people were like, "Why are you doing that job? That must be such a headache." I was like, "No, for all these years, the insurance company has stuck it to me. Now it's my turn to actually reverse the roles." So
That's right. Yeah.
I actually enjoyed that. So yeah.
Yeah. And then these days, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing these days? I don't want to steal your thunder there.
No. So after that, after we built it, another private equity company came along and said they want to buy the whole thing. So I was basically out at that point. I was bought out. And then I actually stayed away from healthcare for a little bit, just taking a break. And I was doing other things in real estate and things. And then healthcare kept calling me back. People started asking for advice and things like that. So I started coaching people. Then I said, okay, if I'm going to coach and help people, which I found very rewarding, really rewarding. And the statement always starts with the first thing, what is your ideal practice? What do you want your ideal life to look like? We will build your practice accordingly. So that's what I do now. I work with individual practices. Some are in private equity. Some they reach out to me and want help too. So I advise them and I help them. I'm advisor for certain things. And then for small private practices, I'm just literally taking all the knowledge that I've gained for all these years and educating my new clients and saying, like, I'll be your coach to help you. And the big difference, honestly, Paul, people ask, what is the difference between a consultant and a coach? A consultant is they're just paying me for my advice, and I'm just giving them advice. A coach is I'm not giving them the answers. I'm pointing them in the right direction, letting them do their homework, because that's where you actually that's where the glue gets formed, and that's where all these little things in your head start metabolizing, and you get the idea of how to do it. Because I'm really just teaching them how to fish, right? I want them to become independent in their thought process and understand how to analyze, as opposed to me doing it for them.
I love this because you've been through all the stages, the starting it, the growing it, the exiting it, and then, all that stuff. And let's take the conversation anywhere you want to go. But I think to your point earlier, not very many people talk about that whole exit area. In other words, I think the most that people talk about the exit is they kind of say there's like something celebratory, like some announcement comes out, such and such PE firm has acquired this or invested in that or whatever. Because all there's so many gaps in that story, what people then read is, oh, Amit got lucky. Or, oh, Amit knew a guy, or so-and-so knew a guy, right? But what they don't realize is, in your case, it was probably like a 10, 15-year overnight success.
Yes and no. There's intention behind it. Like, you identify at a certain point that this is the path that you want to take. And honestly, that's when you start putting certain things into practice to say, how do I get the highest valuation for my company? The practices do that are the smart ones, right? They're going to get the highest value.
So I want to be respectful of the fact that we obviously can't cover all those nuances within a few minutes, but I love that you're talking about this. So in this case, so just for anybody listening, I think the important thing that you're saying here though is that there are slightly different things that are important depending on what kind of outcome you want. In other words, like the company, the practice owner that decides, hey, I just want to make enough cash flow on this thing to buy a sailboat and hang out in the Caribbean. That's totally cool. But what you need to do that, I would think, is slightly different than, hey, I'm going down this PE route and all that. So can you just talk a little bit about that? So once you made that mental decision that PE was where you're going to go, if I was a fly on the wall inside your practice or your management meetings or whatever, like, and again, I know there's a lot of nuance here and we can't be so crazy about it. We can't fit it all in, but just in hindsight, what were like the big differences, big changes you made to kind of get ready for PE?
So the 30,000 level view is this, once you decide that, hey, I'm going to go down the road of, I wanted to sell my practice at some point to get the highest value. Well, actually, let me reverse that. It wasn't for the highest value. It was realizing that you see a certain landscape changing, and the way that you're going to continue to, let's say, 10x your business was that you need to partner with somebody. You could do it alone, but you're going to be more of an impact if you partner with somebody. Then it was like, well, who would be the best partner? So before we even figure that out, I didn't know who that best partner was going to be. I needed to figure out, how do they value my company? What are their methods for valuations? So then I started talking to them and figured out how they do their valuations. Once I figured out how they do their valuations, I said, I don't know which route I'm going to take, but I know that I need to start now to increasing the value of my practice. So for 2 years, I started doing that, and that's where you have the biggest advantage. You start way ahead. If you wait until I think next year, or next month, I want to sell my practice because I'm tired of X, Y, and Z, you're not going to get the biggest bang for your buck, right? So I started 2 years before and started putting systems in my practice, which I already had a lot of systems, but I started cutting out certain costs. I started outsourcing certain things to realize that, hey, I wanted to get the highest EBITDA possible, and putting certain things in practice that made me look like a very, very attractive practice to buy.
If you don't mind my asking, was finance part of your undergrad or any part of your formal education?
No, not at all.
Okay. No, this
Other
is
than
great.
what my mom and dad would teach me at home.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Yeah. I mean, the reason I say this is because, like, I think what you're describing there, you obviously, and I say this with all the respect in the world, you sort of talk about it with, I think you're very humble about it. But the reality is, like, so I've spent the last 20 years in venture capital. And so one of the things I say to entrepreneurs all over the world is, the more you understand the basic financial terms, like what a P&L looks like, what a balance sheet, you don't have to be a CPA, but the more you understand the basic financial terms, the better equipped you are to actually start to understand why and how PE makes decisions, and how that's different than venture capital, how that might be different than a bank loan, because they all have their place. But I think it's really neat because, particularly in the PT, OT speech world or the practice ownership world, I don't think very many practice owners realize that they're actually a finance company that happens to be in healthcare.
Yeah, it's kind of like the McDonald's, right? They just happen to sell hamburgers, but they're in the business of real estate.
Right. I was talking about this with a friend of mine the other day. A lot of people don't realize, for example, airlines are not actually in the business of flying. They're actually in the business of credit cards. That's actually where most of them make most of their profits. The actual operation of aircraft and the seats and the cargo is really just the, user acquisition or eyeball acquisition model. Or it's like Starbucks, right? Starbucks makes more money off of the actual preloading of the card than the coffee beans themselves. So it's just fascinating. So, okay. So you kind of then talked about like those differences. Once you decided on that PE, like you started talking about, how they did valuations. This is also interesting to me too, because a lot of people don't realize how important macroeconomics are to what you're doing. Like in this case, I think, if I remember right, you started down this path and kind of exited, I want to say around 2017, 18. Is that about right?
What they call the first bite of the apple was 2017 when I did my initial partnering, right? And then you're working in the group trying to help build it up. And the last bite was at 2021.
Yeah. And then so it's like, zero interest environment, capital is cheap. Yeah. These guys are just trying to pile drive in. And how you got to your valuations is probably very different than what it is in 2024, where,
So you have to also know what's going on, what's your environment. You have to know your microeconomics as well, and your micro area, like how many practices are in your area, how well are you known for what you're doing. Is it cheaper for somebody to actually acquire you than to try to compete against you? How dense of a market do you have? How easy is it for them to penetrate your market? So, all these things play a factor in how much of your practice is on autopilot for somebody else taking it over, as opposed to, the owner is the one who does everything. So, without the owner, the value of the practice is a lot less. So you just have to look at it from a point of view of like, who's buying it. So you're setting up your avatar kind of like in sales, you're setting up your avatar. Who's your ideal customer and what are they looking for? Same thing here. Who's your ideal customer and what do they look for? And how do you make it so attractive to them that how do you make it like Alex Hormozy says, the offer is too good to say no?
Would you say, and again, hindsight's 2020 here, but when you made that decision, would you say that you were then like, how did you start meeting these PEs or the general partners or whoever it was? Were you cold calling them? Were they cold calling you? Was it a friend of a friend? Just in general,
so the market was
process?
so hot for acquisitions that you're constantly getting like,
right.
People reaching out to you. So then you have just non-descriptive conversations without sharing too much information. Like, what does this look like? How do you do this? How do you do that? And you have it with the PE companies and you have it with strategics and you kind of get to know the people. And then, for me, I knew somebody that was in PE, so I was able to ask a lot more questions. And really, you're just doing just like anybody would. You would do your research, right? You do your research over time. You kind of figure out like what are the differences and what are the things that they're really looking at. And then you kind of form that avatar, like, how do I build it so that they will come? Kind of like the field of dreams.
Well, it's one of those, and I agree with what you're saying, by the way. And the way I would sort of reiterate or rephrase it is I would say that, first of all, you got to build something people want.
Yes. That's the main thing.
And then the second part of this is that you also kind of have to get your name out there. People aren't going to buy anything they don't know about, and so whether you do that through marketing or through, networking or warm connections, like how you do it is irrelevant at this point. It's just, they also got to know that you exist, for those I sort of describe it as like the surface area for luck. Like people think luck is just like, oh man, Amit was in the right room at the right time with the right guy. And truth is, like, if I was a fly on the wall watching you, I suspect that you were intentionally putting yourself out there in different ways to kind of.
Oh yeah, we were doing a lot of PR, just to get the good work that we were doing well known in our community of physicians. So that was out there. But then beyond that, people in the neighboring towns definitely knew who we were. I was doing things on regular TV. I was, not putting ads, but I was fortunate enough there was this local cable channel that had this program called 12 to Your Health. And every quarter they would have me on as the PT that would give advice. Like I would give advice on how to shovel snow properly, right? I would do like those types of things, but you're constantly doing those things. And that's just one area that you're doing, but you're doing so many different things that people are like, yeah, I've seen you there, or I've seen you there, or I know you from this. But it doesn't just catch the attention of patients. It catches the attention of everybody. So, unfortunately in physical therapy, people sometimes and business owners get this wrong too. They think that if they do a good job, business will just show up at their door. And the truth is that if you do a good job, you have to make sure people know that you did a good job. And if you're not good at making people know or your community know that you did a good job, you could sit there and wait, but that's a very slow way of building a practice.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because you talk about these ideas so casually, so comfortably, I should say. But it's very, very rare. Did you, were your parents entrepreneurs or how did you,
no,
if you don't mind my asking?
No, my father was an ink chemist. He had a double master's degree in chemistry. My mom did accounting for a firm that just, internally that helped do some products for NASA. And not entrepreneurial. I don't think they had the entrepreneurial bug. They liked stability.
Yeah, I don't want to bore people with a different topic here, but I think there is something to be said about, like I'll just speak for my parents. I don't know yours, but my parents were immigrants, and to have the ability to move around the world with very limited lifeline, back in the 70s and 80s, you have to be a certain amount of entrepreneurial and risk accepting to do that. But once you get there, you obviously want the least risky stuff for your kids. And that's where that whole like trope of I want my kids to become doctors or lawyers or engineers, I think comes
they believe
from.
In education, right? The higher you get educated, the better your chances at getting a good job.
Right.
That's
I mean,
their mindset.
Yeah. And I think, I'm going to go a little off topic here for a second, but let's just see where this takes the conversation. I grew up in a household where we were taught that doctors were not only important, but extremely successful, that they were making tons of money and all that stuff. And I obviously did not go into medicine, but the point is, so like, it wasn't until I really started to see how reimbursements worked and how the business of medicine really worked to realize that like they have to work quite a bit more just to get to the same amounts of, dollars as, maybe an IT worker or some other industry. And so it was interesting how how much of a disconnect there was there.
Things have also changed over time, 70s, 80s, practicing medicine compared to now. It's very different. Insurance is different. You have to have more complicated systems to be able to get the full reimbursement. You guys know that too. How many practices leave money on the table? They just don't know. They don't know what they don't know.
My prediction on the healthcare, let me make this comment, and I really want you to shoot it down if you disagree, because this is where I think debate is really where it's interesting to me. In broad strokes, I think the healthcare industry, particularly on the practice management, practice ownership, practice reimbursement side of things, I think the healthcare industry in 2024 looks a lot like the broader tech industry in the mid 90s. And what I mean by that is that where we were in the mid 90s when I started my first tech business is that just to accept a credit card, for example, you had to have a relationship with a local bank. You had to put collateral on the line. And then if you did all those things and you were the right skin color or whatever, you would get that black credit card swipey thing. Maybe people listening to this don't remember that, but you'd have to put your credit card on this thing physically, swipe it, and then I'd have to give as the business owner.
Thing. Yes.
That thing, right?
With the carbon with the carbon paper.
Right. Yeah. I'm only 43 and I'm talking like an 80-year-old, right? But this is like the mid to late 90s. You would come in and you'd say, Paul, I want to host a server in your data center. And I'd say, okay, that's going to be $1,000 a month or whatever it is. You're thinking, all right, here's my credit card. I want to wheel that server in 2 minutes from now. I'm thinking, okay, I just swiped your credit card. Amit wants to come in now, but I got to run these carbon copies over to the bank in Leesburg once a week. And maybe 6 weeks from now, Visa will send me the money. And so that's kind of where we are with reimbursement. Now, just for people to understand this, where we've come in 20 years from a tech standpoint, just using payments as an example, is that when you walk into Starbucks or Dunkin' or whatever your favorite breakfast shop is in Manhattan, you pay, you expect that bagel right away. And because of the nature of the technology industry and the banking industry now, 99.9% of the money shows up in that vendor's bank account within 48 hours. I mean, it's magic money. It just shows up. And that's what I mean by the tech industry being where it is today. I think the healthcare industry is about where we were in the mid 90s, but I don't think it's going to take 20 years. I think that we're going to see massive improvements in the next 5 to 7 years through a combination of technology, perhaps some legislation, but I also think it's going to be driven a lot by PE and venture capital forcing some of these changes to happen.
So do you feel that the healthcare industry and the health insurance companies will be able to scrub claims quicker to a point where they'll be able to deposit money into your account within a very short period of time?
I would say that they can already do that. I think they can do that. Now, I'm not. Let me just preface what I'm about to say that I'm by no means like a conspiracy guy. I'm an optimist. I'm an engineer by training. I don't think people are bad. Whatever. That being said, though, let's just use. You're probably familiar with the whole Change Care debacle that occurred 2 or 3 months ago now, where their entire platform got hacked, everything went down, and they were offline for weeks. Let's just talk about this recording system. You and I, right now in the pre-show, we were having some trouble with IT and trying to get this to work, but you and I both know that there's 10 different platforms you and I can use to record this content. And it's because the way the internet was built in the mid 70s or 80s is through this idea that it was actually a military project, that you cannot depend on one fiber optic cable or cable line between you and I. All the packets from my computer might take different routes through the internet before they hit your computer. So we are completely independent of any one platform or anything like that. This is normal. You and I, somebody listening to this right now, when you check Facebook on your phone, you have no idea that 80% of your traffic probably went through one of my data centers without you even knowing it. And it was free to you. Now you were a practice owner, so you know what I'm about to say. Now let's compare that to what it's like to do EDI, ERA with, like electronic remittances with payers. Not only can you not really connect directly to the payer, you have to, more importantly, pick one of these platforms to go through. It could be Change, it could be Waystar, it could be Trizetto, it could be whatever, right?
The clearinghouses, is that what you're referring to?
The clearinghouse. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, you have to pick one because you remember when before you had the 100 practices through the PE firm, you only had the 4 only, I say that respectfully, right? But you with only like a couple locations, you can't connect directly to the payers, nor would you want to. But here's my point. Technically, nothing stops the clearinghouses from becoming fungible. In other words, like I should be able to send an EDI and get an ERA response through any of them, and it should really be platform independent because there is a standard. There is actually a standard for how that communication happens. The only limiting factor is not technology, but rather the business rules around it. When you sign that contract with Waystar or Change or whoever, you make a commitment to them. And so now that I've said all that, I say all that because your question's a good one. Your question was, do you believe that payers could, scrub the claims and get them back? The answer, now that I've said all that, is they can already do it. The reality though is that the business logic of how you connect to these different payers through these clearinghouses is the only limiting factor. This is what I mean by like the industry taking not 20 years to catch up to the tech world. Let's put this into perspective. Stripe, which is in the tech world, a big payment platform. Stripe, I believe, is less than 10 years old. And I think the last I checked, the private market capitalization is little over $50 billion. Billion with a B. And that rivals, if not eclipses, some of the legacy credit card platforms people are used to, like MasterCard or Amex or Visa. So imagine that. These are platforms, credit card. My mom's carried a Visa for 50 years, right? But now you have companies like Stripe that are moving more dollars per second, than these other legacy companies within 10 years. So the pace of change only increases. And I think what's going to happen here, if I was betting with you right now, the reason I think this entire industry is going to look a lot faster, a lot different in a good way for practice owners in the next 5 to 7 years is that one or two things are likely going to happen. One is that a platform, like a payment platform like us, ends up building the actual clearinghouse. Alternatively, a platform like us buys one of the clearinghouses.
Well, the reason I asked even the question is because, as you know, I'm a coach for a lot of physical therapy practices, and I delve into the finance part of it. And what us as practice owners, what we care about, actually, some of them don't even realize that they should be caring about this, and they do actually care about this, is cash flow, right? Finance companies, accountants, what do they care about? EBITDA. The word EBITDA means nothing to a practice owner. Cash flow is king. They need to know how much money is in the account. The sooner that money is in the account, they can use it because it's there. Right. They're not working on an accrual-based system like large, PE companies or larger companies saying that, yeah, but we'll adjust for it when we get it. And right now, yeah, we just have to assume that we have it. No. I'm a small business owner. What's in my account is what I can spend. What's not in my account, I can't spend. So the faster that money gets into my account, the better.
Correct. Yeah, and I could not agree with you more. I think the when I talk at like a second grade level to somebody to kind of like convey this idea, what I say to them is that like your business is a lot trickier than most others. Just using the coffee shop analogy, they sell you a cup of coffee, they got paid for that cup of coffee, and basically for all purposes here, they received the money, even if you used your credit card pretty much the same day. This business is a lot more dangerous in the sense that not only is there maybe depending on your payer mix, not only is there like maybe a 30-ish day average time to payment, any mistake in the process along the way or anything else along the way that breaks, even if it has nothing to do with you, could cause that problem or that cash flow to stop.
And guess what? Your employees still need to get paid. The rent still needs to get paid. And right now, the PT industry, we see salaries going up so high. So the cost of doing business is very high. So we really, as business owners, can't have these little things that happen to our cash flow.
Correct.
Because really, the smart businesses also have a line of credit, if they've established themselves and they understand that, hey, I can't just depend on the whims of the insurance company. If God forbid something happens, I don't have that cash flow. I still need to exist. Let me have a line of credit that's already out there.
If you don't mind me being like a little hand wavy here, I think one of the most important, so on a personal note here, one of the things I am most interested in over the next couple of years, particularly in my role and our role as a company here, is that I don't think there's a modern day business school for practice owners. And what I mean by that is like, in my venture capital firm that I started, very similarly, the hard skills of entrepreneurship are pretty well documented now on YouTube and stuff like that. Like, okay, well, how do you do growth hacking? How do you do pay-per-click ads? How do you do it? That's all like kind of Googleable now. The soft skills are much harder to come by and require what I think that, like, so for example, how do you talk to an investor? Like, how do you structure your teams? How do you actually build for the exit? What are those exits? I don't think that exists in the PT world. And I think there's something interesting with this idea of like, what does and I'm making this up, but like, what if a company like ours actually just gave you 50 grand to start a practice? I'm just going to throw that number out there randomly, but what if we gave you 50 grand to start, but there is a fixed timer, 12 weeks, let's call it, where you're going to have to now, you can do that. That money's there to help you get, make that transition from your day-to-day practice at your employment to, 12 weeks from now, we'll get you into your own practice. But you've got to like commit, you've got to go to the trainings. We've got to talk to you about like, hey, by the way, this is our finance module. Here's what the exit looks like, whether it's PE or lifestyle or whatever. And then there's some sort of graduation at the end. And that graduation, depending on your progress and your ability and what you've done in those last 12 weeks, gets you another $250,000 to now actually focus full time on it. I don't know. There's something there. I'm not trying to make it out of thin air, but
it's almost like an incubator you're creating. You're creating an incubator for PT practice to get the best.
Yeah. I mean, and just from a nomenclature standpoint, I specifically don't use the word incubator because incubators, I think, are so self-directed and there's really no carrot at the proverbial end of that stick. Whereas on the accelerator side, accelerators are what we use in the venture capital world, where we just say like, okay, here's a company that's kind of showing promise, but just needs a little bit more help. Like, in other words, if we were to just give them the money without any oversight, I don't know if that's going to work. But maybe they do need a little bit of training. Let's actually not give them the money without strings. Let's give them the money and say, you got to go through this training with us for 12 weeks or something like that. And it doesn't mean we own like 50%. We own like 5% or something like that. But anyway, the broader idea here though is that like, it's fascinating. And I appreciate you being so candid here, by the way, because like your story online and the way you talk about the business, like I think what people don't realize is that you strike me as somebody that's naturally curious.
I love business and I love looking at different business models and understanding like how do they kind of like when you were pregnant, right? When you guys were pregnant and you were like, well, how are they sending this? How does it work? Nothing is for free. So I was just very curious. And honestly, I still am like, well, what, like in my mind is like, how does our business model work? How does this work? Like I'm always trying to connect the dots and I still am.
I'm the same way. My wife says that I can't enjoy anything because I walk into anything and I'm like, oh, how does that work? What are the economics on that? I want to be really respectful of your time here. And I think if you're open to it, I want to do a part 2 with you at some point here in the future as well. But so these days you spend a lot of time talking to new practice owners. I think we talked a little bit about that in the pre-show here, but
new, established, even PE on end, because I've done it literally from the very beginning through the growth phase, through the exit phase. And then, I worked with a lot of PE companies. So I know what the PEs are looking for, right? And I know what they need, right? So, and I know what a new person needs. And I know the middle portion because I did it and I had to put the systems in place.
Okay. So I'm really not trying to stump you, but I'm genuinely curious here. So you talk to all these different phases or, parts of the life cycle owners. What is something you often talk about with them that they're just blown away by?
I don't know if blown away. Everybody just listens, but I don't know how much actually I think of it this way. I'm going to say 80%, or I'm going to say 100%. They're going to absorb, 20 to 30%. Then I know that the other percentages, I just have to keep reiterating slowly over time. Like, something simple as like, you can't improve something you don't measure. People are like, yeah, of course. So I'm like, what are you guys measuring? Nothing. What do you want to improve? Everything. Like, okay, let's start with the basics, let's start with the basics. So it's literally just starting with the basics and trying to get them like, what is your ideal scenario? What does your ideal practice look like? Tell me in 5 years what you want it to look like. Okay. So let's go through that exercise. Then I kind of figure out where their mind is at, what they're looking for. I'm like, okay, well, if you want that lifestyle and you want that thing, this is how you're going to have to go about it.
Well, it's interesting. And by the way, I love that because it's so true. Because I think a lot of the narrative about, how to sell and how to all this stuff, because nobody talks about it, I think people sort of make up these stories and it has some combination of like, well, it's luck and a guy, it's like those things. But what you're talking about, I think is much more practical because it's like, it's just the basics, right? And I think my answer to the same question essentially is like twofold. Number one, getting bought is different than getting sold. And people at first are like, that's stupid. Well, those are just two different words. What do you, and it's like, well, hang on a minute. If I took my pickup truck and put it on the corner and said it's for sale versus I just have my pickup truck sitting out front and you drive by and you say, I want that. Those are two very different negotiations. One is a low ball offer to start, and the other is how much is it going to cost to take it off your hands. So that's statement number one. I think that gets people's attention. And I think the other part here, particularly as it relates to building to sell, that I say on the venture side is that as much as you might hate to hear this, not you, but them, what needs to be done to sell the business or to get bought is actually the same as what needs to be done if you want to grow the business.
Oh, 100%. So that's, you know what? You just hit the nail on the head, because while I was doing all this, I said to myself, what is the worst case scenario? I just increased my EBITDA, my profit margin goes up, I've created systems inside my practice, and I have other people drooling for my practice. So my downside is nothing. I just created a better company.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.